Okay, let's get into this. We are tackling one of the most poignant, difficult, and I think ultimately essential deep dives we have ever taken.
I agree.
Today, we are focusing on the two-century history of a single institution. Emanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church, or Mother Emanuel in Charleston, South Carolina.
And we really need to be clear up front.
Yeah.
We aren't just looking at the history of a building or, congregation.
Right.
We're using this one church as a powerful, living microcosm to trace the entire painful, yet incredibly resilient arc of Black life in America.
And the setting is just so key.
Oh, absolutely. You have to remember, Charleston is the city where nearly half of all enslaved Africans disembarked in North America.
And it's where the Civil War began.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is foundational ground for understanding American history.
And the source we're using for this deep dive is it's really incredible. We are drawing exclusively from Kevin Sachs' intensively researched book, Mother Emanuel, 2 Centuries of Race, Resistance, and Forgiveness.
Sachs is a Pulitzer Prize winner, and this was not a quick project for him.
Not at all. He spent almost 10 years on the research.
10 years, over 175 interviews, digging through hundreds of historical documents. So this book really gives us the opportunity to truly master this specific piece of history.
So the mission for you, the learner, is to recognize that the tragic violence of 2015 wasn't some random, isolated event.
No, it was the latest brutal iteration in a continuous 2-century struggle for dignity, for independence, and for the very right to assemble freely. It's about connecting the dots between the past and the present.
And the way the book is structured, it sort of throws you right into the present day. It begins and ends with the catastrophic events of June 17th, 2015.
We all know the scene. A 21-year-old white supremacist entered the church during a Wednesday night Bible study.
He targeted a place of sanctuary and slaughtered 9 worshipers, including the pastor, the very charismatic Reverend Clementa Pinckney.
Who was also a respected state legislator.
Right. And the shooter's stated goal was very specific. He wanted to agitate racial strife. He wanted to start a race war.
And what's so fascinating and so deeply historical about this moment is the complete and utter failure of that intent.
He aimed for hatred and division.
And what he got was this profound, almost supernatural wave of unity.
It was an immediate reaction, one that I think history will not forget. But what really surprised me in the research was just the sheer speed of that public display of grace.
It was almost instantaneous. I mean, just 2 days after the tragedy at the killer's bond hearing, families of the victims stood up and just offered this outpouring of forgiveness.
Wow, 2 days.
And Sachs notes that this single moment immediately burned the church and Charleston into the world's consciousness as symbols of an otherworldly grace.
Yeah.
That response redefined the entire narrative before the world could even process the violence.
And that unifying impact just kept building. Days later, you had 10,000 people, all different backgrounds, races, ages linking hands across the massive 2.5-mile span of the Ravenel Bridge.
A huge demonstration of solidarity.
It was.
And that kind of sustained civic response, especially in a city with Charleston's painful history, it really set the stage for one of the most memorable moments of that year.
President Obama's eulogy.
President Barack Obama's eulogy for the victims, yeah. And it culminated in him singing a chorus of Amazing Grace. It was just this expression of deep collective emotion that I don't think anyone expected.
Sachs' research into the tragedy itself is what really grounds the emotional weight of the book. He talks about having to watch the security camera footage that was shown during the trial.
That must have been incredibly difficult.
You see these mundane last moments of the victims' lives. Reverend Pinckney greeting parishioners, Myra Thompson dressing up excitedly for her very first Bible study session.
That small detail, that she dressed up for it, for this moment of fellowship and learning, it just underlines the depths of what was stolen from them.
And then when you look at the other side of that equation, the killer himself, Sachs makes it clear there was no remorse.
No connection to the humanity he destroyed.
None. Even while imprisoned, he was demanding that his mother send him a French primer.
That psychological detachment, that coldness, it's chilling.
It is stunning. But to really understand why that forgiveness was possible, why that institution was so resilient, we have to go back.
We have to follow the history all the way back to the very roots of the African Methodist Episcopal, the AME denomination itself.
Exactly. The story of Mother Emanuel is inseparable from this fight for spiritual and, well, political independence.
That's right. When Black people, both enslaved and free, first worshipped in the colonies, they were often in white-run churches. Sometimes they were even the majority of the congregation.
But that integration came with huge oppressive strings attached.
Absolutely. They were subject to mandatory white overseers. They couldn't really exercise their faith or their leadership freely.
So they needed a space of their own.
The moment black believers realized that true spiritual autonomy was possible only outside of white control, they made what the book calls the daring breakaway.
And that breakaway led directly to the founding of Emanuel AME in 1817.
And this wasn't just, changing buildings.
No, it was an act of profound political defiance.
The whole goal of the AME denomination was to establish a church structure with no white oversight. It was a self-governing body.
And because it was self-governing, Black Christianity developed a completely distinct character from the white Protestantism of the South.
So how was it distinct?
Well, the white church often focused on the next life, urging patience and subservience in the present.
The AME, driven by leaders like Richard Allen, focused on the here and now. They saw the black church as a vehicle for social welfare and activism.
Demanding that Christ's example be followed.
Right, in caring for the poor, the sick, and in denouncing injustice. They insisted on intervention for black believers in this world as well. This focus bolstered notions of self-worth and collective identity, despite conditions that constantly sought to sap the soul.
So that focus on self-worth and activism in this world, not just the next one, that made the black church instantly revolutionary.
And deeply threatening to the slaveholding establishment.
Precisely. The white authorities immediately feared this independent institution. They didn't just see a prayer meeting.
No, they saw a gathering place to foment rebellion and, crucially, a place to acquire knowledge and organize networks.
And that fear just exploded with the Denmark-Vesey plot in 1822.
Can you elaborate on that, the Vesey plot, and what it meant for Mother Emanuel?
Sure. Denmark-Vesey was a former slave, a leader in the early AME community. He planned this massive slave rebellion in Charleston.
It was aborted before it could be launched, though.
Right, but the resulting mass trial and hysteria led directly to the destruction of the original Emanuel church structure.
They literally tore the building down.
They did. And Sachs' analysis of the trials afterwards is just harrowing. He found statistical evidence that suspects who were connected to the church were more than twice as likely to be executed without a pardon.
So the church itself was the main target.
It represented organized thought and independent leadership. It had to be crushed. And the repression didn't stop with the building. By 1834, the state of South Carolina enacted a law
forbidding the teaching of enslaved people to read.
Exactly. That ban is the ultimate proof of the threat they perceived.
If you are so terrified of a religious gathering that you legally ban people from learning to read a Bible, you are terrified of organized, educated resistance.
So the knowledge they got in those fellowship halls was, by state definition, revolutionary.
And for 3 decades, the congregation was forced underground, holding secret meetings until the Civil War ended.
That is just an unbelievable story of perseverance. So when we finally get to the post-Civil War era in 1865, Mother Emanuel is finally rebuilt.
Literally rising from the ashes of repression. And here's a fascinating historical footnote from Sachs' work on the handwritten deeds.
Oh.
The land for the current church site, the one rebuilt after the Civil War, was actually sold by a man named George Alfred Trenholm.
Wait, that name sounds familiar. Wasn't he a major figure in the Confederacy?
The very same. He was the imprisoned former Secretary of the Confederate Treasury. Sack notes the profound irony. The land that became the spiritual and political heart of Black Charleston, rebuilt after the Union victory, was purchased from one of the Confederacy's highest-ranking, now imprisoned officials.
Wow. That single transaction just perfectly symbolizes the massive upheaval of Reconstruction.
It really does. And it sets the stage for the next crucial phase. Because after Reconstruction collapsed and the promise of civil rights disappeared, the church wasn't just a place for black life.
It became the central force.
Absolutely. By the 1870s, what Sack calls the Grand Transformation was complete. Black Christians overwhelmingly self-segregated into churches under their own control and governance.
So with every other path for leadership and expression closed off by Jim Crow,
the black church firmly established itself as the central institutional force in African American life.
So during those relentless, soul-crushing years of Jim Crow, the black church served this critical, almost exclusive function as a sanctuary for agency.
Think about what that meant in practice. It was the only place, the single institution, where black people were unsubordinated by the whim of the dominant caste.
Outside those doors, you had zero power.
Right. But inside, you could hold positions of authority, manage finances, practice public speaking, lead men and women in ways the public and private sectors violently denied you.
It was a training ground for political leadership, built right into its theological structure.
Exactly. And this inherent structure pushed the church toward activism. Preachers began advocating not just for spiritual salvation, but for tangible political goals.
Like labor protection, land ownership.
Public schooling, yeah.
Right.
These issues had to be addressed in the political realm because the church was responsible for the welfare of its people in this world.
And Emanuel's history just showcases this so beautifully. You have figures like Reverend Richard Harvey Kane, Emanuel's first pastor after the Civil War.
And he leveraged his institutional base to win election to Congress during Reconstruction.
And then decades later, you have Reverend Benjamin J. Glover, a pastor and a crusading NAACP leader in the 1960s.
And you can see this power at the local level long before what we think of as the Civil Rights Movement. Take November 1900.
What happened then?
1,500 black Charlestonians packed Emanuel Church to call for the firing of a white police officer who had killed a black suspect.
So this was political assembly, mobilization, demanding accountability.
All powered by 2 centuries of institutional muscle.
And this long, painful, but powerful lineage, it brings us right back to the core concept of Sachs' book, and to that moment in 2015.
The deep historical roots of forgiveness within the AME community. What does 200 years of black suffering teach us about the practice of forgiveness?
And this is the central, powerful argument he makes, that the forgiveness offered in 2015, the one the world seized on, it was often fundamentally misinterpreted.
It wasn't primarily a gift or a grace directed outward toward the unrepentant killer.
So what was it then? How does Sachs frame that distinction?
He argues it was a deep, historical, self-preservationist tactic. It was about the community healing itself first.
So it's an internal act.
Sachs describes forgiveness as a survival tool used by African-American Christians to purge themselves of the destructive toxins of fury and rage.
So rage is the toxin, and forgiveness is the spiritual antidote that's necessary for the community's own survival.
Precisely. If you hold on to the fury and bitterness that's generated by continuous systemic violence and personal tragedy, that toxic anger destroys you internally.
So this tradition of forgiveness, it helped African Americans withstand enslavement, unrelenting violence, Jim Crow.
And it allowed them to maintain their moral superiority over racial superiority.
That really reframes the whole concept of agency. It's about taking back the power the perpetrator tried to steal from you.
Sachs' analysis captures it perfectly. He says, because the choice to forgive is one dignity that cannot be taken away, it also served as a path to empowerment, a restoration of agency to those who have been robbed of it.
It's self-care and self-defense through the moral high ground.
It ensures that the oppressor does not claim the final emotional or spiritual victory.
So what does this entire long story of Mother Emanuel mean for you, the listener, who's trying to get this knowledge quickly but thoroughly?
Well, it means that Emanuel's history isn't just a collection of tragic and triumphant events. It is a clear, unbroken continuum of resistance, survival, and institution building against targeted violence.
And the story forces all of us to confront the reality that this struggle is deeply rooted and persistent.
The book powerfully illustrates that racism is not merely a vestige of a painful past that we're slowly moving beyond.
Yeah.
It is tragically an indelible part of our present, and it requires continuous critical thinking, civic engagement, and work from all of us who want a just society.
And finally, let's tie this back to where we started in the past. We discussed that 1834 South Carolina law that banned teaching enslaved people to read.
Because white authorities feared the knowledge and political organization that came from the black church. That fear was of independent thought and documented history.
And we've seen how the church became a center of knowledge and a handbook for politics, creating leaders like Reverend Pinckney.
So if the historical fight for 2 centuries was over the right to read, to organize, and to assemble freely, what does it mean today in this world that the AME Church demanded justice in when some political forces actively target teaching history itself in classrooms, seeking to literally whitewash that painful past?
That historical fight for knowledge continues today outside the walls of Mother Emanuel.
And it is a battle for our shared American identity.